นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings. One of the central themes of the Buddhist teachings that the Buddha emphasized over and over again, and generally wherever Buddhism is taught and practiced, you'll hear it, is to understand, know the difference between wholesome and unwholesome mental states, kusala and akusala. Or in many of the Asian Buddhist countries, we use the terms bunya and bapa, bun and bap in Thailand. And it's just very convenient categorization of human behavior, not only mental behavior, but the way we speak, the way we act. To see that there is that kind of behavior which is rooted in wholesome intention, non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. And that kind of behavior rooted in unskillful, or you might say selfish, roots of greed, anger, delusion. And especially in the early parts of our practice, we are spending a lot of time just learning what is the difference, how do they manifest, and what do they do, what are the results. What are the results even just on the level of the mind when you have an unwholesome thought as opposed to a wholesome thought. And then of course speech and action, just studying cause and effect in daily life. Sometimes that's quite natural, particularly if you learn any kind of meditation technique, like we were just doing mindfulness of breathing. You naturally learn and observe different ways of thinking and habits of mind and the effects they have, and what are more constructive and helpful in your practice of meditation and training your mind, what are more obstructive and what causes you trouble. That might be this learning to differentiate between the wholesome and the unwholesome in a period of a few minutes, and you're observing it at work, as it were, these different intentions, the different qualities of mind. We also learn over longer periods of time as well, the long-term consequences of our actions, because sometimes the things we've said and done, or even just thought patterns that we've had going through our minds maybe for many years, they can have sometimes quite a strong impact on our life. It can be a specific event or just recurring events, and then at some point in the future, as time unfolds in your life, you have this sense of, oh, this has been really good, and this was a good thing, or this was really bad, or a mistake, or a very harmful thing that I did or said. And we know that, we learn that way as well, through the consequences of our actions. Perhaps in the old days, in say Buddhist countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka and so on, then you'd learn about this as part of your education. You go to school and you learn a lot about morality, karma, sometimes you're studying the life stories of the Buddha, or previous life stories of the Buddha, and different aspects of this whole teaching on good and bad karma. But that's now become less and less fashionable as we focus more on secular activities, science and so on in education. It's seen more as sort of an individual choice, what is right, wrong, good, bad, which perhaps is a shame because it may mean that opportunities to understand these things from a young age are lost. Of course, schools is only one way we get education. Parents and family have a huge role in helping kids understand these terms, and so if you are Buddhist, have faith in the Buddhist teachings, well, that's one thing you can give to your children, is some kind of knowledge and ability to know the difference between the wholesome and the unwholesome, good and bad, good and evil. It seems ever more important these days as well because of the information, being the information age, information technology, we're exposed to so much information about what's going on in the world, again, about people's behavior, good and bad. And it's useful to have a filter and a way of reflecting on all this information you're absorbing. Of course, we have control there as well. Everyone complains that there's too much bad news around, but I mean, we have a certain choice how much we look at and hear and pay attention to, but sometimes we're getting it secondhand anyway from other people around us. But as we absorb news and pick up information, it's useful to keep reflecting on what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what leads to what, the results of karma, observing how people's successes and happiness comes from one set of causes and conditions, people's lack of success or problems and suffering comes from maybe another set of conditions. Sometimes it's quite obvious, isn't it, when you hear news or look at other people around you. Sometimes it's not so obvious. So we also have those doubts, and that's another aspect of this, the doubt that comes up. Why do bad things happen to good people? Good things seem to happen to bad people. We often have, that can bring up doubt about the whole teaching on karma. Nevertheless, it's a useful way to try and understand human behavior and the impact our actions have on our lives. Because we're being bombarded with this information anyway, so we might as well use some of the wisdom of the Buddha to help us understand better what's going on. So just as when you meditate, say if you were meditating just now, you probably realize there were a lot of thoughts and ideas, memories popping into your mind that as you were meditating and trying to focus your mind maybe on the breath, the breathing, seemed to disturb you, take you away from the breath and seem very important. But now, maybe after you've stopped trying to watch your breath, if you're listening to this talk, or on another occasion, if you're being meditating, then you go off and do something else. Those thoughts, memories, ideas, things that were coming up during the meditation, after you finish, quite often they just drop away, don't they? They don't seem that important. You maybe forget all about them, even though when you're meditating they seem the most important thing in the world, pulling your attention. That also is giving you an awareness, even if you're not picking up information and news and stuff from the rest of the world, your own mind is doing it as well, constantly bringing up thoughts and memories and emotions, and you have to filter through them as well. One thing people have problems with also is if, say, they have what we call an unwholesome thought, a thought based in anger or a negative thought directed to oneself, someone else, or a situation that comes up. Already we'll start to feel sad if the thought we've become aware of is unwholesome. We also, a further sort of insight you gain, isn't it, as you meditate, as you realize, well, a lot of stuff is just coming up through the power of habit. We call it the conditioning process. As you observe your mind, well, things that you've thought of before will pop up out of habit. And the important thing is to try to be aware, isn't it, from moment to moment of what is coming up. Not to judge yourself. This is a word we're using a lot nowadays. You know, we judge somebody or we judge ourselves or give judgment. Usually it means, you know, to be critical, negative towards, to look down on, and so on. We judge ourselves straight away and say, oh, I shouldn't be thinking that. But of course, when you're mindful, the aim is just to be aware, just to know. It's a more neutral quality of mind, where you're centered, more balanced, you're even in your mind, there's even-mindedness present. Even if something is quite extreme, you have extreme excitement and happiness, or extreme misery, extreme negative thought, very unwholesome, selfish intention may arise. Your real aim is just to maintain mindfulness, isn't it? Rather than to rush in and judge yourself and double the suffering of whatever's happening in your mind. You know, so you have an angry thought and then you get angry or critical of yourself for having an angry thought. You know, so many meditators complain of this. They're not happy with what they see or observe going on in their mind. And it's not incorrect in a way, because if you do see a negative intention arise, some real greed, selfishness, jealousy, anguish, identifying it as negative, a cause of suffering, well, that's helpful. But what we tend to do, in the beginning at least, is to just immediately judge ourselves as being bad, wrong for having that thought. And that is a new, fresh intention and a fresh thought. So as you begin practicing meditation, your aim is to be mindful, and perhaps you have this sort of vague idea, I want to be peaceful, blissful, relaxed, have no thoughts bothering me, no stress in my mind. You know, everyone likes that idea. As soon as you see something that is stressful or negative, you're not happy. So instead of becoming peaceful and relaxed as you meditate, you become more agitated with yourself and despairing and disappointed and fed up and self-critical because of whatever's coming up. One good antidote to that is to, at the beginning of a meditation, either cultivate the thought of loving kindness for oneself, for others, and in relation to that, as an additional practice or slight variation on that, just bring up an appreciation of the good things in your life so far that you have, the good you've achieved, the good things around you, an appreciation of what you've got. Because our habit is so often to be negative and go to the negative and judge ourselves, judge others, be negative about things. It's very hard to stick with a meditation, and if you're aiming to train and practice in meditation, this negativity is a big obstacle, especially in the beginning. So consciously putting your mind, before you even come to the breath, say, putting your mind to reflect on good things in your life, in your experience, whether it's recent good things or good things you remember from 10 years ago or something. Focusing on the good, developing a sense of appreciation, maybe gratitude for people who have helped us and so on. These have a very positive, good effect on the mind. And if your habit is generally to bring up a lot of negative thoughts as you're meditating, well, it's an antidote to that in the beginning. And it won't last necessarily, as you've done a period of meditation, appreciating the good things in your life, gratitude for others. Excuse me. well, then the negativity may rear its head again, come back on you. But you, hopefully, over time, practicing regularly, you might learn things and see the value of this and see the wholesome effect, get a good idea of what is a wholesome stream of thought, as opposed to an unwholesome negative stream of thought which agitates the mind, makes the meditation harder. Remember, that's part of what you're learning, the difference between the wholesome and the unwholesome. So sometimes you have to consciously focus on wholesome thoughts, wholesome ideas, wholesome concepts, and develop them, meaning keeping them in mind and even thinking them through using your mental activity. You might call this, for want of a better word, wholesome proliferation. So, if you first you might doubt that that's even useful. You say, "What, thinking about good things? Isn't that just another distraction?" Well, it can be, but perhaps in the beginning, when our mindfulness is weak and our understanding is weak, perhaps it's a helpful way to develop your mind, to use your mind. It's something you have to try. It's not necessarily correct or right for everyone, but it's something you can try. Because our mind loves to think and loves to proliferate. As you meditate, if your mindfulness is not that sharp, not that strong or continuous, there will definitely be mental proliferation going on. Thinking, we say like expansive thinking, the mind going out to different objects, in different directions, to the past, to the future, to things we like, things we don't like. This sort of diffusion of the mind, spreading of the mind. Another word they use is fabrication. The mind is constantly fabricating things out of nothing or out of past experience. And this is a habit, a form of karma. But one way you can deal with it is to train the mind at least to think of good things, because they tend to calm you down, bring up a sense of contentment, and bring up a sense of meaning, happiness on one level, better than more negative thoughts which only agitate the mind, make the mind more restless. And that, if that is your habit, then to train to go in the other direction can be quite conducive to more peaceful states of mind, better states of mind that will support meditation. So it's something to try. Sometimes just reflecting on good fortune, just as an idea. Have I got any good fortune in my life? Because sometimes, especially when we're depressed, the thought that I had good fortune is just alien. It's like, no, I have no good fortune, everything's wrong, everything's bad. When you're in a mood, that's how you think, isn't it? You can't see anything good in your life, the people around you, the world around you, it's all bad, it's all wrong, and you may feel terrible. It's understandable if you've got to that point, but if you're listening to this talk, you probably are interested to find ways through that. And one way is to focus on the opposite. The opposite of despair is something that's more positive, hopeful. Disappointment, focus on creating success, creating good things, focusing on what you've achieved so far in your life. And some of that is very subtle, and that you never think about it. Say if you're reasonably healthy, no serious illness or injury, that already is a very great thing. A lot of people in the world can't say that. And it's not always an age thing, it's also just, your situation in your life. You may have physical ailments, injuries, problems. But if you don't have anything too significant that doesn't intrude on your life, that's an amazing good fortune. That's something to be happy about. If you're in a situation where you have enough food to eat every day, you've got a place to stay, that's something to be happy about. If you've received support, help in different ways from parents or family or different people in your life since you were born, that's something to reflect on, feel good about. It's something to acknowledge. And sometimes we have to consciously turn the mind to that, to counter the tendency to proliferate in a more negative way about what's wrong, what we don't like, the complaining mind, the fault-finding mind. So this is one simple suggestion, but it can be very effective. Because if you do it, rather than bringing your mind to proliferate about what's wrong and judging yourself, judging others, etc., which tends to bring a sense of agitation and discontent, and the mind is just not settled, or it can bring up a sense of well-being and feeling more settled. So then to turn the mind to go to a refined meditation object like the breath, or to recite Buddha, becomes more doable. I hesitate to say easier, because it tends not to be an easy practice, certainly in the beginning, but it's just more doable and tends to go better. You're more willing to put effort into something if you're coming from a place of feeling that you have something, your life is not that bad, things are not that bad. If there's some more positive thinking going on, then you're more willing to put effort into watching the breath, reciting Buddha or whatever. For people who have a lot of faith, what we call sattva-jaritas, faith characters, then often this comes quite naturally. They think of the Buddha, or think of the teacher, or think of the teachings, the Dhamma, and this comes up quite naturally. They start to feel good, listening to talks, chanting, those kind of activities. Already they tend to feel good, and that can help them prepare the mind to go into a more refined meditation, such as observing the in and out breath. But a lot of us don't have strong faith, certainly in the beginning. We may have a more critical mind. That's our education system, and our culture now is to be very critical, self-critical, critical of others, always thinking, always finding fault, always seeing what's wrong, always mistrusting the world and things around us. So we carry that attitude and that habit into our meditation. So often it's very hard to settle down. The mind is just proliferating in a negative way, thinking quite negatively. And you see the results of that. You're sitting there and you can't sit still, because when your mind is proliferating in a negative way, it affects your body as well. So you find it hard to sit still, agitated, moving around. Even if your eyes are closed, maybe you notice your eyes are sort of flickering with all these thoughts. Or one thing I noticed when I first began meditating is if I get caught into a negative state of mind, my hands started to sort of move, my fingers would move. So I would train myself just to sit with the hands together. I followed my teacher, Ajahn Kalyano. He said just put one hand on the other, ideally with thumbs touching, but you don't have to. But then just to watch when you're agitated, how your thumbs or your fingers move apart, how you maybe can't hold the meditation posture for very long, because the mental agitation actually comes out physically as well. It's just one thing to observe, but you see the agitating effect of negative states of mind. So you might consciously turn the mind back to remind yourself of your posture, sit still, not to become obsessed with it, but just to observe it, sit still, bring your mind back to focus on something that makes you more content. As I said, if you're a more faith-orientated character, that may be something like reflecting on the Dhamma, the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, chanting. If you're a more critical type, then you may have to think of something, reason things through, why it's good for you, remind yourself why it's good to meditate, and maybe remind yourself why you meditate, why you ever began doing it, what attracted you to the Buddhist teachings. Using your mind, you might say your critical faculty, the thinking mind, and using proliferation, but with a purpose, which is to guide your mind and your body to the practice of the meditation with the ultimate goal maybe of focusing just on the in and out breath. To get to that point, you may have to think yourself through a few obstacles and remind yourself of aspects of the teachings which will bring you back to the present moment. Maybe just observing the very agitated nature of the mind when we are thinking, proliferating in a negative way. You don't feel good, and you have to observe that or see that for yourself, which will give you some motivation to sort of let go. Maybe you feel tired. Oh, I'm always feeling anxious, agitated. I'm always being negative about myself, others. And you see some of the suffering of that. So then you tire of that way of thinking by seeing it, knowing it, or witnessing it, and then you let go. I'm just giving examples here, but the aim is to start curbing this mental proliferation, bringing the mind back to the present moment and to your meditation object. As I've talked about in other talks, often just reflecting on the impermanent changing nature of the mind is another one, but also the agitated nature of the mind, the suffering of the mind is another way you can let go, because you just see, it's suffering to keep endlessly proliferating about stuff. When you really look at it, you observe it, you start to tire, and you won't feed it so much. Because of past karma and past habit, well, of course, thoughts keep coming up. What's changing is your attitude, and your mindfulness and wisdom as it comes up will change the way you look at this, all your mental activity. You may not immediately be able to stop thinking. Everyone wants to stop the thoughts, but they can't. But what changes your attitude towards your thoughts? And more at peace with your own mental activity. That's very wholesome karma. It's not that you're stopping your thoughts, but the way you view your own thoughts, the thoughts that you are witnessing that come up, that's what changes. Ultimately, the Buddha said, we're training the mind to recognize that the 5 khandhas, body, feelings, thought formations, perceptions, sense consciousness, are not self. Impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. Subject to the 3 characteristics. That's a big, that's a very advanced goal. Not something you can do just like that. But nevertheless, as you're practicing meditation, it's the most direct way to start observing that in practice, in your mind, in your experience, from moment to moment. And if you meditate regularly, even if it's only 10 or 15 minutes a day, say, you get to know these movements of the mind, the mental proliferation, the changes and feelings in your body. You get to see things because you're doing it in a repeated way. You can't help but start to know yourself better, know this body and mind, but also from a place of more just being mindful of being aware of things rather than always following. So, proliferation is taking place, thoughts come up, worries, whatever it may be, comes up. But now you're observing, and that weakens the karma, the tendency to keep following, keep generating the same kind of suffering or intensifying the same kind of suffering. This is, you might say, the power of mindfulness. Sometimes the Buddha would compare it to like a mirror where you're looking back at your own mind, seeing it more clearly. And that's such a rare thing for us to do as humans, because we're not doing it. We're thinking and going out, following the proliferation, wanting things, wanting to get rid of things and so on, following craving. But to develop the mirror of mindfulness, the ability to reflect back on ourselves, see the way things are, is a very rare but very powerful, good state of mind. Even that, just reflecting, say at the beginning of meditation, say, I'm fortunate to have heard the Dhamma, practiced some meditation before, I've been mindful before, I can be mindful again. I've done it before, I can do it again. Even that can already put your mind in a better attitude, better state than, say, when you began your meditation. Reminding yourself of the benefits of mindfulness and the fact that you've practiced it before, and maybe even had some clarity and insight before. You set off on your meditation each time. You might begin like that and then put effort into it, and you'll learn things as you go. Whether you're peaceful or not, you're learning. And it's a process of learning, waking up. We say waking up to the truth, learning the truth about the nature of your 5 khandhas, your body and mind. And you can't help but notice it's all so changeable, unreliable, whereas the practice of mindfulness, wisdom, is something that's much more dependable or reliable. Hence we say it's a refuge. One who sees the Dhamma, sees the Buddha, one who sees the Dhamma has a refuge for themselves. That seeing the Dhamma or knowing the Dhamma is simply cultivating this ability to hold attention, direct attention to yourself, to your own 5 khandhas, and then observe arising and ceasing, the uncertain, the changing nature of your 5 khandhas, and the suffering of when you attach and you hold on strongly or identify strongly, you suffer. As monks, we regularly get people coming to sort of challenge us about our lifestyle, and they sort of say, oh, you're selfish, it's a selfish lifestyle, just coming to live in the forest, meditating, you get a free meal every day and you just meditate, but you're not really doing anything for the world. It's a very common sort of thing people say. Maybe even more common, people think it, but they don't say it, I don't know. But you do hear it said from time to time. What the Buddha pointed out is really to help other people practice letting go of selfishness and doing things for the world or improving the world. You really also have to do it for yourself, at least at the same time, or ideally, first of all. Very difficult to help other people in an unselfish way, meaning not wanting anything in return, not expecting or wanting anything from others, until you've learned to bring your own mind under control more and see the truth of your own mind better. If you do this practice, you practice more mindfulness, and develop more insight, you can't help but notice things that you've noticed in your own mind in other people. And that's such a valuable insight because it will help you to share or encourage people in the right direction because you're speaking from experience. It doesn't mean to say you have to necessarily be an arahant or a meditation master, but just if you've sincerely practiced meditation for a while, you'll learn things about yourself, and much of what you're learning is just human experience. You'll notice how the proliferating mind is not peaceful, it's rooted in some kind of mental agitation, worry, anguish, greed, desire, whatever. You'll notice that. And you'll notice it agitates you, and you can assume it's agitating other people as well. You may not know exactly how they're feeling. From one person to another, we don't know, do we, what our neighbour is feeling. But you know from your own mind when you're agitated or when you're stressed, it feels a certain way, it's not good, you know that. And you can assume other people, when they say they're stressed, they're agitated, they're feeling something similar. Even if they don't say anything, you can maybe observe it in their outward behaviour. So you get to know this. Then maybe you can give them some useful advice or help them, support them, comfort them, advise them, be a good example to them, whatever. Whereas, when we begin our life, we're often very idealistic and we think, the world should be a certain way and everyone should behave a certain way and everything should go how I think it should go. And then often we do look at other people who, say you see a monk just meditating in the forest, you might think, well, what's he doing for anyone? A waste of time or selfish. But if you do try some meditation, you'll also appreciate it's not an easy thing to do. It's actually not easy to just quietly live in the forest practicing mindfulness. And you may also realize you gain a lot of understanding that it's quite hard to develop in other forms, other walks of life. Because everyone's so busy and so stressed, they often are not watching their mind, so they don't really understand where their stress is coming from or what to do about it. Hence all the problems of the world. As I always say, well, sitting and meditating in the forest, at the very least, you're not adding much to the problems of the world. People may say you're not doing anything helpful, you're not helping anyone, you're not fixing the world's problems. Well, at least you're not adding to them, which is already a good start. But probably you are improving the world's problems or helping the world in one way or another, because if you're fixing your own mind, however slowly, however gently, or inefficiently, if we're honest, often we're not that efficient at improving our minds. It's still a step in the right direction though, isn't it? Better than nothing. One of the reasons I came to practice meditation and practice Buddhism is because when I was young, I also had that thought, the world is in a mess. I should use my body, my mind, my time, my energy to do something to contribute to the world. But very quickly, looking around at what I could do, I realized I don't really know how to help other people effectively or what is the best way to help. Sometimes we have to be humble and realize we have to learn a bit first before we can go out and help the world. Even the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, went out to train himself before he started teaching the world. And that's the Buddha. So I would imagine for most of us, we're in the same sort of position. So humility has a certain place in our practice, to accept that you don't know everything, and you start from very sort of humble beginnings as you meditate. Just work on one moment of mindfulness, one moment of awareness, reflecting back on what's going on, trying to understand what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, the results of wholesome and unwholesome action. Just trying to understand in that small, humble way. What Luang Por Chah once called the earthworm view of things. Nobody in the world thinks of being an earthworm. They're downtrodden, excuse the pun. They're down under the ground, seemingly unimportant, even though they do a lot of good for the soil, as any gardener will tell you. They're not really looked at as important for the world, and they don't look very nice. A lot of people don't even like them, find them quite ugly. But an earthworm, it's hard to see an earthworm being arrogant, haughty, pushing itself around. It just quietly goes about its business. And Ajahn Chah said, maybe this is an attitude to develop in your meditation, to have the earthworm view, to be able to start from humble beginnings, just keep working at developing mindfulness, reflecting on your mind and what's going on, accepting that you're not perfect, you're not the best, but to keep going and not give up. And little by little, just as an earthworm is aerating the soil, if you study it, that's one of the benefits of earthworms. You're aerating your mind, your view, and the world around you with good karma by cultivating moments and moments of mindfulness and some insight, and maybe abandoning some of those unwholesome tendencies, cultivating the wholesome tendencies. So nothing wrong with being an earthworm, or developing that attitude sometimes, being more humble. And often you can get by without creating a lot of waves or suffering also, because the more you stand up, the opposite of earthworm is to be proud, arrogant, stand up, make a noise, make a big impression, and often we're encouraged to do that. And I guess there are some situations you can think of that may be appropriate, but generally the more we do that, the more we suffer. The higher we stand, the taller we stand, there's more target to be shot down, as it were, and more trouble for us. So starting out with the earthworm mentality, maybe there's something useful for that in our practice of meditation, training the mind. Accepting that you don't know everything, because if you're going to learn, you have to accept that you don't know everything. Otherwise, you'll stop learning because you think you know everything. So again, some humility, and even in some situations where you might even know quite a lot through experience or what you've done in your life, you don't always have to display it. Because sometimes you display your knowledge and it becomes a cause for friction, or you get shot down, or it can make life more complicated. Sometimes you even have to agree just to be quiet in a situation or not present all the knowledge you know, or at least not too quickly, because that will help you to carry on practicing conveniently. It's comfortable for you as a practitioner. Sometimes you even avoid situations where you have to display everything you know and share all your knowledge. I'm not saying all the time, of course, but quite often it can be a very useful technique for protecting your Dhamma practice and keeping things small and simple so you can get on with your own practice before engaging too much with the world around you. Again, that's not something you'll hear very much in society. Most people nowadays, your education and preparation for the world, they're saying, you've got to present yourself, talk loud, talk clearly, talk at an interview for a job, or present yourself in one way or another. You've always got to have an opinion and display your opinion. If you don't have any opinions, it's almost like you're not worth much. That tends to be our cultural conditioning now. But sometimes the earthworm mentality can be helpful for giving you a kind of opportunity to just quietly develop yourself kind of under the radar for a bit longer, keep you out of trouble, keep you protected in a way. So that's something to bear in mind. When the situation is appropriate, sometimes we don't need to display all our knowledge and everything we know. As Luang Por Phượng once told his foreign student, who was complaining that being a foreign student in Thailand, this was in Thailand, everyone wants to talk to you. The Thai people, the other foreign visitors, everyone wants to talk to you, find things out, and he got no time to meditate. So Luang Por Phượng said to him, when they speak to you in English, answer them in Thai. When they speak to you in Thai, answer them in English, and then everyone will leave you alone. Sometimes when you're training yourself, you're practicing, you have to find skillful ways to be left alone. Keep yourself to yourself, at least up to a point, until you're more confident and you know what you're doing. And then maybe you can help people more effectively because you do know what you're doing. But until that point, maybe it's okay to be an earthworm. You just go about your business. Or another version of it is, Ajahn Chah said, be like a squirrel. The squirrels in Thailand, if you live in the jungle, you'll always be seeing squirrels, ground squirrels, tree squirrels. And their behavior is such that they'll come out when there's food to be had, and they'll quickly come out, get the food, and then quickly disappear again. You don't see them all the time. They're just there briefly, do their business, get the food, go away. It's mainly to keep themselves out of trouble, protected from danger. And he used to tell the monks, he said, be more like a squirrel, just come out and do it. If you have a job to do, come out and do it, but then go back and disappear. And then you've got time to practice, you're protected from the world, and all the world is throwing at you. Maybe next time you've got your mobile phone out, you say, it's time to be a squirrel. So, you stop scrolling or stop looking at the messages or turn the phone off. be more like a squirrel and go back and do more mindfulness practice or do something useful and good without getting too distracted. So we have to learn how to protect ourselves as we're meditating, because we are dealing with a mind that is untrained and we have all kinds of worries and doubts and negativity coming up. We can't engage too much with the world too quickly, otherwise everything is very confusing and stressful. So being more squirrel-like, more earthworm-like, for want of better metaphors, can be very helpful with the practice of meditation. And when the time comes, well, you come out and you share some reflections with other people, that's all right, in the appropriate occasion. So these are some of the basic things you're learning as you meditate. You're learning how to look after your mind, how to be patient with all your past karma that starts coming up, to recognize what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, to cultivate the wholesome, abandon the unwholesome, and to keep working at it, to keep reflecting back. Use the mirror of mindfulness, reflect back on your mind as you meditate, and of course when you're not meditating as well, to keep doing it. And to be a bit humble so that you've got more time and energy available for yourself, for your practice. So maybe I'll say just this much for tonight on the talk, and if anyone has any questions, we will do our best to answer them after this.